Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining our next session, Mobilizing Policy Leadership to Make College Civic Learning a Shared Priority. Again, I'm Yolanda Watson Spiva, and I serve as the president of Complete College America. The CLDE Coalition brings together policy and educational organizations, and our purpose in this session is really to explore the role that different types of policy and educational agencies can play together in expanding the civic learning movement so that all college students and our democracy actually benefit from this alliance. CCA and the CLDE Consortium are committed to reform and actually to transformative change writ large. But the question really is what needs to change? And how can the organizations represented on this next panel assist in driving the change that's actually necessary? Well, actually, one answer to that question actually comes from the panel that we just heard from. We've heard from Ashley Finley and Linda Garcia that civic learning has powerful benefits for students, including benefits for completion. But large numbers of students do not participate, and the disparities are especially striking between 2 and 4 year higher educational opportunities. So, how do we move civic learning from optional to expected? And I'm going to ask each member of this panel to weigh in on this challenge of how do we move from an optional engagement in college civic learning to an expected one. And so I'll direct my first question to our first panelist, Dr. Martha Kanter. Hello, Martha. How are you?
I'm great. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be part of this.
Thank you. Martha, you've been leading College Promise since 2015, and you also played a critical role in bringing together the lead partners in this coalition, Complete College America, College Promise, SHIO, AAC&U, and Campus Compact. Why does civic learning matter for the students that College Promise serves? And how do we change the reality that the 2 year college students Promise serves may be less likely than others to actually actively participate in college civic learning? What do you think, Martha?
Yeah, well, the first thing is just to frame um, how I look at this. I think that's important. And then I'll get to the students. At College Promise, we think of three outcomes that we want for every student. And we want to really focus on students that haven't had opportunity, first generation students. We just did a big paper on 10 populations, undocumented students, veterans and military families, foster youth who are aged out of the foster care system. So they're really adults. And they have great need. So we've got 10 out of hundreds and hundreds of subgroups in this country and a lot of crossover. And the way we think about it is the outcomes we want for all of these students, especially for those that have not had the opportunity, that are marginalized, that you read about in the paper. They don't have, maybe some of them don't have the financial literacy, so they get into debt and all kinds of problems. So we think of it in three buckets: college, career, and community. That's what we want for every student, to be successful in those three buckets. I'm sure you can think of more buckets, but to narrow the focus in College Promise, those are our three buckets. And that, if you think of that along a horizontal line, the vertical line for us is 0 through life.
Mhm.
If we don't have a children's savings account at 0, and Senator Booker talks about this, $6,000 savings account by the time the student's in first grade. They'll have $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. They can buy a car. They can have college, debt-free college, and there's just a lot of opportunity. How does a student get a savings account? Family, parents, community members. So when we think of 0 through life, that's our framework. Most of what we concentrate on is the transition from high school to, through, and beyond college to career and community. So how do we change this? Why does it matter for these students? As I said, the focus is on these populations that have distinct needs, but some of them have common needs: counseling, advising, mental health. That's common, especially now with COVID, to all students. All students need that, but underserved, underrepresented students need more of that because they don't have generally the kind of family support or extended family support that many of you on this call, on this webinar, have had since an early age. So we really try to not be their parents, but we try to give them those needs, a mentor and so forth, that will help them get to college first, choose the one that best fits their need, not drop out, persist, be retained, and hopefully graduate. Many of them are working while they're in college, so we want them to get paid internships. One of the things we want is for them to have those internships that are paid, that are service oriented, as well as private sector internships. The internship program now, the work study, it's often you find students in the cafeteria or in the financial aid office. I want them in research in the classroom. I want them out in the community doing environmental cleanup. I want them in the mayor's office serving the city council. I want them in all manner of public and private service that gives them the orientation to how they will fit in and thrive in a community. So with that, just getting to your last sentence, Yolanda, how do we change the reality about community college students who aren't going to be as likely as others to be active participants? We've got some research on that. Frankly, leadership matters in this case. And when I think of community college districts, when I think of individual campuses across the country, there's somewhere around 1,000 with millions and millions of students. If I were there again, I spent many years there, I would march into the academic senate and I'd say, can we make a competition? Can we do something that the faculty can take the lead on and really embed civic learning throughout the curriculum and throughout the service components of our institution? So that's the first thing. Can we get the faculty engaged? If they're engaged, it happens. Many community colleges don't have money for a civic learning center. But can one be created with the community around, the faith community, the government, the business, private sector? That's what we do in College Promise. We bring 7 sectors together to be the leadership for these individual communities. And then at the same time, I go for the president, the chancellor, the provost, the board, whoever in the administration can take responsibility and make the case. Community colleges have a special challenge in that they are the most underfunded system, but there's tremendous creativity. And even on this call, College of the Canyons is just one example of many that are leading the way. But there's so much more to do. So thanks, Yolanda, for those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Martha. Next, as we're talking about how we mobilize policy leadership in order to make college civic learning a shared priority, we couldn't have that conversation without engaging the SHIO organization. And so I'd like to welcome Rob Anderson from SHIO, president of SHIO, to the conversation. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks so much, Yolanda.
Great. Well, Rob, SHIO has been a strong supporter, and you've been right there since the beginning as we began to frame the conversation about accelerating the college civic learning movement. Tell me why this is a priority for you personally and SHIO as an organization, and if you could tell us what SHIO is doing right now with the coalition partners to really accelerate the spread of college civic learning in public higher education.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, it's a national organization that works directly with state systems and coordinating boards and bodies. Really, this issue is a no-brainer. It fits both in what is critical and what is urgent, what is necessary for us as state entities moving forward if we are going to advance our students, our economies, and our states as a whole in a healthy manner. It really should move forward as a movement in either a nonpartisan or bipartisan manner. Serving in the role we do at SHIO, you work with all 50 states. The politics in these states differ, but that shouldn't matter when it comes to this issue. It could be one where the way some of these strategies play out might differ, but the necessity and the urgency to move forward with state plans and strategies really should not be tamped down by this fact. What we've done in the past is try to massify policy innovations that do matter on the national landscape into states. And one that you've been heavily involved in, Yolanda, is co-requisite remediation. And working with institutions, many of our states have found out that that's an applicable model that needed to be expanded at the state level. And so they did that. And when I think of civic engagement and I think of the conversations that need to take place, that's exactly what we need to do. And we're very fortunate to be working with a colleague, Dr. Richard Freeland, who is both the former president of Northeastern University, as well as the former commissioner for the higher education office in Massachusetts. And he's one that heartily believes in this work. And he's begun to scour the landscape and find those states that have started to look at this issue of civic engagement. And four early ones that have been pinpointed are Maryland, Massachusetts, Utah, and Virginia. And so what we're doing through Richard is starting to have engagement with these states. And our plan is to bring them together to have further dialogue, to cross-pollinate with one another, share best practices, potential barriers, so that they can start to work together as a collaborative on expanding what they're doing within their states. And our ultimate goal within this is to expand this 4-state collaborative even more into 15 states that we'll try to bring together, probably via Zoom, to have similar conversations. And so if you're out there listening today, you're involved in a campus, you're with a state entity, and you know that your state has started to have these conversations, or you would like to see that happen, please reach out to us, because we would love to have you as a part of this dialogue moving forward. And also, it's important to note that while this is a key initiative for us, we don't stand alone. We're working with the other collaborative partners that you've mentioned, Yolanda, as well as one of our newer members to this arrangement, which is NASH, the National Association for System Heads, which we have an overlap within our membership, and we can expand in certain ways and they can expand in others. So we're looking forward to working with NASH on this moving forward. But let's start with this strong coalition of the willing. We know that these are efforts that we need to pursue within our states. And based on that, we can start to build out models that other states will then replicate. So I look forward to this work, and I look forward to the conversation that's going to follow.
Thank you so much, Rob. I'd like to now ask Faye Akindes to join us on the conversation. Faye, can you join us in the conversation? How are you?
Yes, thank you. I'm fine. Thank you, Yolanda.
Wonderful. Now, Faye, I know you spent 20 years as a professor of communications at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, and actually for the past 6 years, you've led the University of Wisconsin's professional and faculty development programs. In that role, as I understand it, you also work closely with each of the 13 teaching and learning centers on the 13 UW campuses. The multi-state collaborative that Rob was just referring to will almost certainly be calling leaders in your system to invite them to be included in the intended college civic learning collaboration. What advice would you give the multi-state collaboration to ensure that the system outreach on civic learning works well for the faculty, who are going to be really critical players in any effort to revitalize college civic learning? Tell me what you think, Faye.
Okay. Before I address the multi-state collaborative, let me share a brief introduction of my institution. Faculty development in the University of Wisconsin system started organically as a grassroots effort in the 1970s. A handful of professors had the humility to admit that being a content expert did not necessarily mean that they were prepared to be effective teachers. The UW system then adopted teaching as an institutional responsibility and established a system office to oversee faculty and instructor development. Today, each of our 13 universities has a teaching and learning center, and center directors comprise a system-wide advisory council along with faculty and instructor members. Together, we produce 3 annual system-wide programs: a spring conference on teaching and learning, a 3.5-day institute retreat, and a year-long community of practice on the scholarship of teaching and learning. Themes of equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice are threaded through all of our programs. Now let me answer your question. Ideally, any initiative that involves faculty, instructors, lecturers, and teaching and learning needs to include teaching and learning center directors from the beginning of the design process. This was made clear during and after a recent high impact practices project managed by NASH, the National Association of System Heads. 5 of the 13 universities in the UW system participated in this Lumina funded project. And although we encouraged our university teams to include teaching and learning center directors, not all of them did. At the end of the project, the university teams concluded that it is critical to include teaching and learning center directors in the entire process, not as an add-on, not in a peripheral way, not after the initiative is already underway, but integrated from an initiative's inception. The value of teaching and learning centers was again affirmed during the COVID pandemic in spring and summer of 2020, when the UW system initiated faculty and instructional development in online teaching. Center directors at our 13 universities mobilized their faculty and instructors with urgency and efficiency. Our 40-year infrastructure was prepared for the crisis. Now I'd like to share 3 recommendations for the multi-state collaborative. First, inclusion. Invite your teaching and learning center directors to participate in your civic learning initiative from its inception. I imagine center directors from multiple state institutions collectively forming a community of practice to share challenges, resources, and ideas. Second, acknowledge your teaching and learning center directors, as well as faculty, instructors, and lecturers as professionals. Don't prescribe what they should do to implement any policy. Rather, empower them to model their pedagogy, to critically analyze the problem and generate innovative solutions. They have the potential to synergistically move your initiative, influenced by the wisdom of teaching professionals who are already engaged in civic engagement and equity. Third, empower teaching and learning centers with the necessary resources, including time, to enable and empower them to be successful. There are 3 essential needs for a teaching and learning center: a full-time director, a physical space exclusively for faculty and academic staff, and a realistic budget. These are the basics. There are other needs, such as ongoing professional development for the director, which isn't a luxury, but a necessity. In summary, build on what exists. Leverage the work of teaching and learning center directors. Identify departments and programs that are already engaged in civic learning and engaged democracy. Civic learning, like high impact practices, already exists and have existed for years. Our challenge is to amplify, to bring it to scale. Thank you.
No, thank you, Faye. That's so important. And I appreciate all of the sage wisdom and advice in terms of how we can make this a reality on the other campuses across the nation. Thank you. You know, we couldn't have this conversation without talking to accrediting bodies. And so the Higher Learning Commission is one of the oldest accrediting bodies in the nation, founded in 1895 as one of 6 regional accreditors in the United States. And we know that accreditation really helps by verifying that institutions meet standards and that they're engaged in continuous improvement. So as we think about how we move forward in terms of civic learning and democracy, I'd love to bring Barbara Gellman-Danley into the conversation from the Higher Learning Commission. Hi, Barbara. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for joining. So the Higher Learning Commission, I understand, made civic engagement an accreditation standard in 2020. And you have 971 institutions in your commission. So this new accreditation standard has already really given new prominence to higher education's mission to serve the public good. But I'd like to understand from your perspective, how did you all decide to take this action, lifting civic engagement to the level of an accreditation standard? And how are your members responding to that move? And just another corollary to that question is, what role do you think institutional accreditation can play going forward to make college civic learning a shared priority for the nation and for all of today's students as well?
Well, thank you for the question. I would say that in 2020, a lot happened. Of course, the pandemic began, but we were doing a strategic plan for our organization. And at the same time, we were constantly looking at our criteria. We had a champion in-house who was very proactive about discussing civic learning. And I think having a champion is critically important. And then you spread it across an organization or a campus, as Wisconsin has done so well.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's important to know that our plan is under the term evolve. It has those 6 tenets, and the last one is engagement. And engagement includes civic learning and engagement. So not only is it in our criteria now, but at the same time, it's part of our strategic directions, which we follow and we measure constantly. So we hold ourselves to the same standard of evidence when, as far as work getting done.
Mm-hmm.
When we were invited to come into this, we came in immediately. It fit our values. It made a lot of sense. And it's actually 7 because there was one that became 2 a while back. Regional accreditors, formerly known as regional accreditors, have signed on to this very important initiative. At HLC, we developed a criterion after speaking to our members. And we do that. We don't just send something down from the top. So what we did is we sent out a survey and we sent out some possible draft language, and we got really good input. I mean, we get a high percentage, a very significant return every time we send out a survey. A topic like this, you can imagine institutions had an opinion. We were and continuously are reminded of the importance of mission. So I want to read you the criteria. It's a core component of 1C in case you want to go online and look at it. The institution provides opportunities for civic engagement in a diverse, multicultural society and globally connected world as appropriate within its mission and for the constituencies it serves. Now, we do ask for evidence, but the emphasis I made is really important. We would not say to a certain type of institution, they have to do it the same way. And I've heard previous speakers on this panel and before say, we don't send a missive down from the top saying this is how it has to be done. But we are looking for evidence. And in the evidence, it can be all over the place. It's what the institutions decide they need to do, want to do, and maybe in reverse order. And then we'll have an opportunity to measure whether or not they're taking place. Overall, the way it fits our values is we serve everything from tribal colleges, community college, to research ones, regional campuses, HBCUs, etc. So we look at the term public good across all of those organizations. What is the return to the community? Not just a skill set for work, but what is the return for the community? So we want people to get out beyond the campus, be engaged in their communities, and it can be done with online students as well. It's just a matter of really having an intentional, as others have used that term, program. I kind of look at it this way. You can have, and this is not something I made up myself, you could have a job, a career, or a calling.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who get engaged this way, there were some very good statistics provided to us and research that shows a higher success rate for students who are engaged with civic learning. And I would imagine some of them have that aha teachable moment where it becomes more than a job, more than a career, and it becomes a calling.
Yes.
And we think it's very important to give our students, and we have millions within our area or our current membership, the opportunity to look beyond a very narrow view of higher education and learning. We care about our society at HLC. We care about the things going on in the communities that our organizations serve. So as I indicated, it would be different. Apprenticeships, other kinds of things, co-ops, internships, depending on the institution, or voluntary work, as was so well described in a previous session, and here about learning about soup kitchens. Inclusion is very important to us. The first E in our Evolve plan is equity, and our entire approach to being an accreditor is student focus. One would think it's institutional focus, but it's actually student focus. So we shifted our mission and everything at the same time, and this really fits. So you will see it throughout what HLC does, and we train our peer reviewers well. We're looking for that kind of learning, and we're very grateful to be part of this initiative. It keeps us honest, humble, and involved.
Honest, humble, and involved. Well, thank you for your involvement, Barbara. We look forward to continuing on the journey with you. Thank you. You know, as I look back on our speakers on this panel, we could not have had this star-studded, all-star panel without bringing in someone who really, I think, embodies and represents all of the various sectors that have been represented so far on the call. And so I'd like to ask Michelle Cooper to join in this part of the conversation. Thank you, Michelle. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Wonderful. Welcome.
Thank
Now,
you.
Michelle, you wear at least 3 hats in this discussion, or have worn, maybe not simultaneously, but somehow you've managed to have them fit neatly on your head. You've led the Institute for Higher Education Policy as their president for many years. And of course, you did your best to hold both accountable, to hold policy accountable for both increasing college success and ensuring the value of college. And you all were very significant in the conversation about the value of college. And so you then spent a year or more in a senior role at the Department of Education as in the Office of Post-Secondary Education. And now you've moved to a new role at Lumina Foundation as Executive Director of the Washington office. Lumina has begun to fund specific initiatives on U.S. democracy, including the research study that Ashley Finley reported in the previous hour. So thank you all for that. And so my question, though, to you is that as you think about the goal of the CLDE coalition that we've stated in terms of making college civic learning a shared priority for the United States higher education, give us your best strategic advice. And is the federal government a likely partner in this effort? Or should the coalition continue to focus on state level and accreditation-led efforts? And then what about philanthropy? Since you have hats and have had your tentacles in all parts of these, where does the federal government, the state, accreditation, and philanthropy fall in this conversation? And what would it take to make college civic learning a top priority for many of the philanthropies already investing in student success?
Okay, that is a pretty high bar. I will do my absolute best to sort of tackle each of your questions. I'll start off with the yes and answer. So yes, the federal government should be a likely partner in this effort, and so should the states and the accreditors. As you mentioned, I spent some time at the U.S. Department of Education. I spent about 1.5 years there. I was a leader in the Biden administration, and I had the pleasure of serving this country in a number of capacities. And I got to an opportunity to interface with many college leaders and learn even more about their work, especially their work during a time of the pandemic and the recovery from the pandemic. One of the assignments that I had there was to lead the pandemic recovery efforts by managing the $76 billion in pandemic aid to students and institutions, and help our colleges and our communities to really build their capacities for serving these students better. And so while I'm not any longer in a position to speak on behalf of the federal government, one thing that I'm certain of, at least when I was there, is that there is this firm commitment to educational quality, educational equity, student success and completion, and recovery. And so recognizing that, they absolutely should be a very critical, important partner in this effort. And I think the challenge for the CLDE coalition is to really think about what are the policy levers that the federal government can pull. Certainly, there might be some opportunities that can be informed by guidance to the field that can be sent out, but also the federal government has a national prominence and profile, and really there's a bully pulpit where they can be used to help with spreading the message that we have been talking about here for the last 2 days. And certainly with the state level and accreditation level efforts, we've already heard the panelists who represent those constituencies talk about each of those. I think as I was listening to them, I think the only panelist that's not on this group right now would be the workforce leaders. You know, workforce leaders could speak to, certainly there's a need to make sure our graduates are coming out of college with the technical skills and expertise, but there's also these skills around team building, critical thinking, servant leadership. All of these skills are very, very important, and they're part of this framework that we're talking about today. And they help students, when they graduate, go into the workforce, be successful, and help to build the kind of workforce culture that we need. A culture that fosters inclusivity, that promotes a more fair and just society. Those are really, really important things. Onto the funder component. So I am very new to the funder world, 3 months in. And to this role, I bring excitement for Lumina Foundation's goal of increasing the number of students who attain high quality degrees or credentials, and credentials that can really confer value, real value in the labor market. For those of you who are not familiar with the Lumina Foundation, we are an independent private foundation committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. And over the last 15 years, the Lumina Foundation has played a central role in placing the spotlight on the need for greater credential attainment. And we do our work because we believe very strongly that post-secondary credentials can help an individual achieve career outcomes that lead to economic mobility. But it also equips them with the sensibilities to contribute to the broader social and shared well-being of our society. That's very, very important. Mm-hmm. So we're not just wanting college graduates to gain degrees for the sake of earning degrees. We believe that there's real value in achieving high quality degrees that can prepare people for informed citizenship and success in a global economy. So we do this work because we believe as we increase college attainment, we can simultaneously increase students' understanding of democracy, the public good, social responsibility, and linking that to workforce development and societal well-being. And so we're eager to work in partnership with campus leaders to determine the most logical and feasible approaches to elevating civic learning and engagement among today's students. We see ourselves in this learning posture. We believe that the real leaders of this effort are those of you who are assembled here as the practitioners who are working day in and day out with our students. I believe that policy change should be informed by campus practices, sort of a ground up approach. And I believe this because my career started on a college campus. So maybe, Yolanda, maybe I wear 4 hats in this conversation. My career started on a college campus. And on that campus, I worked day in and day out with our students. I worked with other campus leaders who were truly, truly committed to student success, not just in the classroom, but also in the broader community. So working with students, intimately understanding their needs, knowing who they are, the assets that they bring to their educational journeys, and the barriers that they face in matriculating through college is the strength of our campus practitioners. And they are so adept at responding to those. I often call them the first responders. And they are on the front line of policy change. So for our part, at the foundation, we want to listen, we want to learn. My colleagues and I are here today because we really want to be able to make sure that we are doing our best to elevate how colleges are responding and helping to build the public trust, especially across community of difference. And we are hopeful that we can gain new insights and find ways to connect our attainment and equity agenda with those efforts that are on the ground, that are supportive of strengthening our society and building stronger democratic systems.
Wow. Michelle, that was amazing. So thank you. And I'd like to ask all of you to help join me in thanking Michelle Asha Cooper, Barbara Gellman-Danley, Faye Akindes, Rob Anderson, and Martha Kanter for all of their engagement on this panel and for their leadership in this national effort to make college civic learning expected rather than an optional opportunity for students. Now, in organizing this forum, we asked our participants to tell us which questions they wanted the forum to address, and several mentioned the fraught political environment. Those are the terminologies that the participants used. And they also talked about the intense scrutiny that higher education is now under. Others mentioned the importance of depolarizing campus conversations and teaching the skills of deliberative dialogue, or just teaching civility in general. I'd like the panelists, Rob, Martha, Faye, Barbara, anyone, Michelle, to just join in, weigh in, and give the participants your best advice on navigating this current political environment and ensuring that civic learning really does engage students of all backgrounds and viewpoints, whether you're left, right, or center. How do we do that?
Very astute observations that were just made. And really our nation, our states, our campuses need to really demonstrate some courage to lead on this front at this juncture in our nation's history. I really do think it's that critical. There's both necessity and urgency. We in state offices can get caught up on what's the immediacy of what lies in front of us. But I think we need to be thinking 5, 10, 15 years from now if we don't take the steps that are needed. Higher ed has been used as a battering ram. It's been a polarizing force. And really, I think if we have an inclusive process, if we hear each other's concerns within states and on campuses regarding where we're heading with this, it can demystify some of that and have an intentional process that we really can make some headway. I often think that it's not that we don't have big enough ideas, but I wonder if we have big enough tables to put people around. So that's what we need to do on this within our states.
I love the word courage. I would add respect. We find it critically important in accreditation to respect the differences among our institutions. So think of any type of institution and how it could resist certain kinds of civic learning, or it could accept and embrace it. And I fully agree that courage is needed to speak up at this time, because that would be a loss of the entire DNA and culture of higher education if our voices were crushed. So I would just say it will be more successful if we respect opinions of others, as opposed to just create this bifurcation where everybody's fighting with each other. And if you think back to your childhood, if the siblings are fighting, the parents, they can get right in there and have a real problem with it. And so we are a family in higher education, and we need to act on behalf of the overall mission.
I think in today's political climate, there may be a tendency to self-censor or to police one's voice or actions to avoid calling attention to oneself or one's programs, one's work, to ensure that the phone doesn't ring from a legislator or a constituent or administrator. And my advice for making civic learning a shared national policy echoes what Barbara and HLC, what Barbara talked about earlier about her work at HLC, and that is to revisit your university's mission. It's very likely that your mission statement supports the advancement of civic learning. And so if it's in your mission, we need to act on it. You need to act on it. We need to act on our mission statement.
I was going to say that I think, institutionally, I used to do this all the time. The speech faculty know how to convene difficult conversations. And those conversations could be convened by experts because they know how to oversee public dialogue. And there's a whole history and a whole language and a whole bunch of scholarship around that. We don't use it enough. We don't know about it enough. And I think there are many, many people that know how to bring very diverse viewpoints into the same space. They may go out of the space with the same viewpoints they had to get in, But if they're, as everyone said, respectful and you have a decent conversation, it starts the wheels turning. And that's one thing that I think is so essential. The other thing is there are people like Senator Cole. People don't know Senator Cole from Oklahoma, but he has a deep love for history. And he's an American Indian. And he signed on to the Civic Secures Democracy Act. I think we need to understand on both sides of the political spectrum who could be in this game that could really help this move forward. And I think, it's $1 billion. I think the Department of Ed could put a big stake in the ground, and I'm going to put it up in the chat, to actually go back to what they were supposed to do in 2012, which was to implement 9 recommendations that were published by the department under Arne Duncan to move the ball forward as a federal government. So there's a lot of little pieces, whether it's, members of Congress that have a real keen interest in action in this, whether it's, different agencies that have already published that have, a long history of a crucible moment, whether it's local folks. I just think there's a real opportunity here to really move civic education and democracy learning forward.
Yeah, and the last thing I would add to your question, Yolanda, is that these discussions around this topic that you raise have been things we've been focusing on at the foundation. I've been really heartened by the approach to my colleagues and really being very attuned and responsive to the concerns. These are concerns that many of our partners have brought to us saying, we need cover, we need help. And so there's certainly a number of things that can be done. And I think what you can count on from us is that we want to work alongside our partners to be proactive, forward thinking, and help to be useful problem solvers here. We can work in coalition and collaboratives to help sort of address some of these. We want to figure out ways that we can make sure that we don't lose ground on the progress that we have been making on racial equity and civic engagement, and raising the importance about democratic engagement. But at the same time, we know that some people can say and do things and others cannot. So one of the things that we are always encouraged to think about and do at the foundation by our president, Jamie Marasotis, is to really think about how can we take risk. And so you should think about us in ways of being problem solvers and helping to think about where we can help in these particular areas. We want to be helpful, and we intend to be as well.
Thank you so much. I'd like to first of all, thank our panelists, and then to remind our audience that the next band of our concurrent sessions will begin at about 3:45. And at that time, we're going to really dig deeper into many of the specific topics you heard from these panelists today. And that was around evidence. Earlier, you heard from Ashley and team, you heard about completion, around inclusion, around state systems, community colleges, accreditation, and school and college alignment. And so we would ask that you would choose those topics that are of special interest to you and your work, and help expand the coalition's efforts to make college civic learning both expected and inclusive. And so